Let's go.
The Haunting of the Old Mill. The old mill had always been a source of fascination for me. It stood on the outskirts of town, its weathered walls and rusted machinery a stark contrast to the modern buildings that surrounded it. I had heard stories about the mill, of strange noises and unexplained phenomena, but I had never taken them seriously. One night I decided to explore the mill. I was drawn to its mystery, its allure. I took my flashlight and ventured inside. The mill was dark and cold, the air thick with the smell of dust and decay. I wandered through the empty rooms, my footsteps echoing in the silence. As I explored, I began to hear strange noises. Whispers, footsteps, the creaking of old wood. I tried to ignore them, but they grew louder and louder. I felt like I was being watched, followed. I reached the top floor of the mill, a large open room with a high ceiling. The room was empty except for a single old machine. I approached the machine and touched it. Suddenly, the machine whirred to life. I jumped back in surprise. The machine began to spin, faster and faster. I tried to run, but I was trapped. The machine was too big and heavy to move. I watched in horror as the machine spun faster and faster. The room began to shake and the walls started to crack. I felt like I was going to die. Just as I was about to give up hope, the machine stopped. I fell to the ground, exhausted and terrified. I looked up and saw a figure standing in the doorway. It was a tall, thin figure with long white hair. It had no face, just a blank, white mask. The figure raised its hand and pointed at me. I screamed and tried to run, but I couldn't move. The figure reached out and touched me. I felt a cold, sharp pain, and then everything went black. When I woke up, I was lying on the floor of the mill. I was alone, and the machine was silent. I looked around, but there was no sign of the figure. I stumbled out of the mill and into the night. I didn't stop running until I reached my house. I didn't sleep that night. I kept seeing the figure, its blank white mask, staring at me. I never went back to the old mill. I don't know what happened to me that night, but I know I don't want to find out. Now, story number 2. Title: Amelia's Night Walks. I always loved night walks. The silence, the darkness, just you and your thoughts. But last week, everything changed. I live in a small town surrounded by a dense forest. They say there's an old abandoned hospital in this forest where strange experiments were once conducted. But I didn't believe those tales. Last night, I decided to take a walk in the forest. It was a full moon, and I could see the path well. I was walking along the trail, enjoying the silence, when suddenly I heard a strange sound. It was something between a whisper and a groan. I stopped and listened. The sound repeated, but this time it was closer. I took out my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam of light tore twisted trees and thick bushes from the darkness. I slowly walked forward, trying to find the source of the sound. Suddenly I saw her. She stood in the shadow of a tree, white as chalk, with long black hair covering her face. She was looking at me, but I couldn't make out her eyes. I wanted to speak, but I couldn't utter a word. My feet seemed to be rooted to the ground. She slowly approached me, and I felt a coldness that pierced me to the bone. She reached out and touched my face. Her fingers were as cold as ice. I closed my eyes and heard her whisper, "You shouldn't have come here." When I opened my eyes, she was gone. I stood alone in the dark forest with only the moonlight illuminating my way. I went home, but I couldn't sleep. Her words echoed in my head like a curse. The next day, I decided to learn more about the old hospital. I found old articles in the local library. They told of strange experiments conducted in the hospital. Patients disappeared without a trace, and those who survived spoke of terrible things. I also found a photo of the woman I saw in the forest. Her name was Amelia, and she was one of the hospital's patients. They say she died during an experiment. I realized I had seen her ghost, and she warned me not to return to the forest. But I couldn't leave it at that. I wanted to know what happened in that hospital. I returned to the forest that same night. I walked along the trail until I saw the old hospital. It stood on a hill, dark and gloomy. I approached it and opened the door. Inside, it was dark and cold. I turned on the flashlight and began to explore the rooms. I saw old medical instruments scattered on the floor and bloodstains on the walls. I entered one of the rooms and saw a table with a body lying on it. It was Amelia. She was dead, but her eyes were open. They stared at me in horror. Suddenly, I heard a whisper behind me. "You should have listened to me." I turned around and saw Amelia. She stood behind me, her face contorted with rage. She lunged at me, and I screamed. I don't know what happened next. All I remember is the cold and the darkness. When I came to, I was lying on the forest floor. It was morning. I didn't know how much time had passed, but I knew I would never return to that hospital. I went home and told my story, but no one believed me. They said I was crazy. But I know what I saw, and I know that Amelia is still there, in the old hospital, waiting for her next victim.